At AV&R, our mission is to humanize robotics. We decided to create this podcast series to help you demystify the world of robotics and discover what some of the brightest minds in the field are doing. Welcome to Robotics for All Podcasts by AV&R.
Sean Fenske is Editor-in-Chief of Medical Product Outsourcing and Orthopedic Design and Technology magazines. He's been in the business for 18 years, focusing on medical journalism, with more than 16 specifically focused on the medical device and healthcare technology sectors. He's authored articles and blogs on technology trends, new innovations, industry challenges, and future outlooks. In this conversation, Sean gives us a status report on how the medical device industry is doing in the pandemic, and then we jump into the fascinating world of surgical robots. It's amazing how the technology landscape has grown and how robotics are becoming an essential part of today's medical procedures. Hope everyone enjoys the show. Here we go. Hi, Sean. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. I caught the webinar series that you put together. What was the name of it?
That was the global trends in medtech, OEMs and the supply chain. We had a fantastic speaker by the name of Tony Freeman.
Yeah, it was really interesting, and with our couple of false starts here, it really highlights the way we're all working from home and the COVID situation. So one of the interesting things that Tony shared during I think it was the first webinar series, he talked a bit about how the medical device industry and the OEMs were reacting to the lockdowns, and I was really struck, and we've seen this from some of our experience dealing with some of our customers, but how quickly the medical device industry not only reacted and felt a bit of the pain of the lockdowns, but how quickly it bounced back.
Right. Well, the unique thing about the medical device industry is it's one of the few industries that's typically not impacted by what is going on in the rest of the world, meaning, in 2008 when we were facing recession, medical device industry stayed, of course there was a dip, but it stayed relatively even. It didn't have the dramatic effect from things like a recession or, obviously there's a time of need for in a natural disaster, but you definitely don't have it's not reflected in the medical device industry the same way as it is in other industries. Right. When we have especially certainly worldwide events, but the pandemic was definitely a unique exception to that rule because it affected everyone regardless of industry. So we definitely saw an impact to the medical device industry. And
I was just going to go a little bit further on that. When he had in his slide deck, he had a slide showing, I think it was Q3, where there was a compression and the operating budgets went down, and then Q4 it jumped right back up. I don't know if you have any updated stats and where we're at now. Certainly from our standpoint, so we deal with the manufacturing, and we service a lot of the OEMs and the contract manufacturers with providing robotic solutions. And certainly this quarter here, some of our customers have told us, we're watching out, we're holding on to budgets until the end of this quarter. So I don't know if you've seen similar types of discussions, or what have you heard?
It's funny. Yeah, because last year, speaking to some OEMs earlier in the year, at the start of the pandemic, second quarter really, one in particular told me his concern wasn't necessarily ramping up to provide pandemic supplies. His concern was when the industry recovered and there was an urgent need for surgical supplies or everything that had been put on hold, and the anticipation of those healthcare centers, hospitals, doctors trying to play catch up with their patients, and what the demand would be like for medical device supplies at that stage. I don't think we saw that really in Q4, but we may still see it, maybe Q3 this year, maybe, the actually what ends up happening, it seems, is that it's a little bit slower of a recovery
Hmm.
rather than being all at once. Elective surgeries have come back, but I don't think we're at full capacity yet.
Yeah.
So instead of seeing a huge ramp up Q4, like what was perhaps thought early in the pandemic, we're seeing it progress slower, which is better for the supply chain, of course, because you're not getting that rapid ramp up.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, we had on one of our previous webinars, we had a spinal surgeon, Dr. Michael Weber, on, and I was talking with him. I guess it would have been in February, and he says he's back in the OR, but yeah, he's not definitely not going at the pace that he was. And this is Canada. It's a little different than down in the States. We've got a little different setup here. But so he was scaled back through Christmas, and now he's starting. Things are starting to ramp up for him as well too.
Yeah, I think you definitely saw elective surgery starting to come back. Orthopedic, you mentioned spine. Orthopedic was a huge hit because, with the exception of trauma cases, really everything is considered an elective surgery. So, for the orthopedic space, that was a major hit. We saw that in the OEMs as well. You're starting to see numbers come through from quarters, and everyone is just down across the board.
Yeah.
Some are more dramatic. If they're a little more diversified, obviously their number isn't as bad. But for those that are purely orthopedic, the numbers are way down, double digits for sales.
Yeah, yeah. Not to, we have the lockdowns, and not to mention this disease, unfortunately targets that client base that is in that age that requires some of these elective surgeries. So that's a
Exactly.
bit of a double
Exactly.
hit.
Yep.
Oh, interesting. So, one of the reasons I thought it would be fascinating to have you on our podcast was, I had come across one of the articles in MPO magazine titled "Robot Wars," and I thought, what a great topic to talk about. We spend so much time. We talked a little bit about manufacturing, but we spend so much time in manufacturing, and it's fascinating to see what other areas, how they're using robots, and what's happening in the medical world and surgeries is just phenomenal. And it's hard to, we see automation in manufacturing. We're saying, how are you transforming that into the medical? So it'll be great to listen to what's going on in that space. And I don't know if you could maybe start off and give a little bit of lay of the land of some of the different players and where uh, surgical robots started.
Yeah. Well, the first company to get the FDA clearance for or approval of a device was Intuitive Surgical, and they came out with the Da Vinci robot. That was back around 2000, 2001. Um, I think it was 99 in Europe or outside of the U.S., and then 2000 for the U.S. And that was the first laparoscopic surgical robot, you know, being uh, was out in the field. Um, then they had a long string of years where they were the dominant player. They for many of those years they were the only player. I mean, really, there were a couple other ones. There was a company called Computer Motion that came out with a Zeus robotic system.
Okay.
They were bought by Da Vinci or bought by Intuitive Surgical in 2003. So there really wasn't many people going up against Da Vinci.
How
Uh,
come? I'm curious why such a big gap? Is it the approval, or is it the belief
well,
that it was feasible?
I think honestly, I think there's just such an R&D
Hmm.
back, backlog for something like the Da Vinci system that it's not just something that you're gonna flip and do in a year's time. That's years and years and years of
Yeah.
R&D, but also not to mention that as I understand it, Intuitive was very savvy in how they use patented technologies and how they proprietary processes that could have prevented other companies from replicating what they were doing directly. So they had to come up with their own unique approach. But I think and I had just started really covering the industry in 2000 when this came out, so I wasn't intimately familiar with any of the stories prior to that. Um, but I will say that when it came out, it was I think it was relatively unique to the industry. It wasn't something that you had 10 players working on robotic systems, and Intuitive just happened to be the first one to come out. As far as I understand it, they were fairly unique in their development.
Okay.
There's definitely a few reasons.
Okay. And maybe it's worthwhile just what is laparoscopic surgery? For those of
Uh,
us that aren't surgeons and haven't had it done yet.
yeah, well, I mean, it all ties in with the minimally invasive movement of instrumentation being used in small incisions in the body where instruments are being delivered into the body through small incisions, and the surgery is being done within the cavity, within the body cavity, with these instruments, with cameras, so that they can avoid doing a full, open surgical procedure. And that's how the robots are being utilized, where they deliver these instruments into small incisions. Things helps with healing and it helps with recovery. But that's
Okay.
essentially what
Okay.
laparoscopy is.
So Da Vinci, they had a monopoly for, well, it's almost 20 years, it looks like, where they were ahead of the curve, and then some other players started to come in. And did
Yeah, they
they
have,
did
yeah,
they go
they
after the same market space or?
well, it's interesting that the Da Vinci is now, it started off relatively small in terms of where what areas it was done or it was participating in, but now it's okay, approved for cardiac, colorectal, general surgery, gynecological surgery, thoracic, urological. So it definitely has an array of application areas. In 2017, the Senhance surgical robotic system came out. That one's from Transentrix Surgical, and that one offered haptic feedback, so it gave the surgeon a sense of feel,
Ah,
as they were performing the procedure, which of course for a surgeon who's accustomed to doing the instrumentation or holding the instrumentation themselves and feeling what it is to bump up against bone or soft tissue, and the difference there, that makes a huge difference. um
so they had some sort of force sensing, I guess, as they would the end of the robot that was going into the
yeah,
patient, and they would translate that into a feedback, this haptic feedback for the surgeon to feel.
right, exactly. Yeah, it's definitely being done with sensor technologies,
Yeah.
and I've actually experienced it myself with uh VR technology
Okay.
for training situation where same sort of thing, you're doing a simulated surgery, and the haptic feedback in the remote control of your the handset
Yeah. Okay.
is providing a sense of what you would feel if you were actually performing the surgery. It's really, really interesting technology. Honestly, it's a little creepy because of the difference. You go from muscle to tissue to bone, and to feel the difference is kind of odd for somebody who's not accustomed to it.
Oh yeah, you really feel it's quite realistic.
Yeah, it's very realistic when you
Wow.
you you get different resistance levels. When you're pushing up against it, or trying to cut, or do a certain motion. You definitely feel the difference right in the hand instruments, or whatever the handset
Gotcha.
that comes with it. That and you're wearing the goggles, so you see the patient and whatever procedure you're doing.
So we do a lot of finishing with, on especially metals, polishing and grinding, deburring. So I wonder if there's, and we're always looking for new ways to teach that, and often what we do is we look at what a person does, and then there's some creativity that goes, okay, how do you translate into that robot environment? I wonder if there's something there that uh, to get that feedback. Maybe there's a trick that we can use for teaching some of the polishing parameters that we get into.
Right. Well, of course, for surgery procedures, the advantage is that you don't have to work on either a human cadaver
Mm,
or an actual live patient. I mean,
yeah.
the last thing you want to do is train a surgeon on a live patient, for the first time using a device, or so the VR environment gives them unlimited uh, trial opportunities. They can continue to do a procedure over and over, and really kind of really get a full understanding of what they're doing. I don't know if you're dealing with metals or something where scrap would be an issue or something
Hmm.
like that. But if that's not a concern, then it may be a little overkill for that type of application. But
Right.
hey, I don't know. I mean, it's a way. It's certainly a way for somebody to experience it.
Yeah, certainly they're not more valuable than a human life, but there is some components they get up and they're worth more than my house probably. So,
Yeah.
and you can't get many of those into your shop to try things out. So that
Yeah. Exactly.
in
So in
those
that case,
exotic applications, there's maybe a business case for checking some of this stuff out.
yeah, and I mean they already have the softwares are basically written. It's a matter of putting in the parameters of what the what the person would experience as opposed to a human human tissue, just the metals and the resistance that they would get. But yeah, you'd have to just find a VR partner to work with.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So you talked about some of the new players. What are some of the other players that have come out? On my list when I went through uh, the article, there's one company that's still working on getting approval, and it was up here in Canada, so it was close to home. So I checked them out a little bit. But Titan Medical,
Yeah, well, you have so you have Intuitive, Transentrix with both products on the market, and then you do have some development happening. As you said, Titan Medical has been in development for, um, as far as I know, at least 6 years. I don't know how close they are to market launch. They've been in the news lately because they've been getting some increased funding, so they hopefully are on the right path, but you could just see how long this takes. I mean, that was my introduction to Titan Medical. Like I said, about 6 years ago, and they were already. It wasn't like that was their coming out party. They were already a known entity then. So you know, that's again going back to that intuitive surgical question. This is the lead time that you're dealing with.
right?
6-10 years is not unusual for this level of precision for a medical system. The medical device industry is notorious for very long lead times. And when you're dealing with something like a robotic surgical system, you're certainly going to have uh, that type of lead time. So Titan Medical is one. Another one that's been in the news is a company or a company by the name of Verb Surgical. And what this was is it started as a joint project between Alphabet, which is Google, and their medical division, and J&J, Johnson and Johnson, as a joint effort to develop a robotic surgical system. Google has since left the project. I believe it was last year they were allowed J&J to buy them out, um, and J&J is still pursuing it. It's part of a digital surgery solution that they are doing. It involves data and analytics, artificial intelligence, the robotic surgical system. So really a full suite of products and services for surgeons to just enhance their capabilities. So These are all the soft tissue,
Okay.
like I said earlier, colorectal, general surgery, gynecological, these kind of surgical procedures. Then there's a whole different realm in the orthopedic space. So you mentioned spine earlier. You get a whole different list because the Da Vinci, the Senhance, it's unlikely Titan or Verb Surgical. It's none of the products that are out, and those will probably not be able to be used in the orthopedic space. The orthopedic space is a completely different animal.
Okay.
So for that area, we've got Medtronic a couple of years ago bought a company called Mazor for spine surgery. Stryker purchased a company, Mako, that does knee and hip. Smith and Nephew has the Navio, which does knee. Zimmer Biomet has the Rosa, which does knee. Has the Rosa One, which does neurosurgery and spine. Globus has the Excelsius, which is spine.
Okay.
J&J has Velis, which is knee, and it also has digital surgery solutions for hip and shoulder. You have Corin with Omnibotics, does knee. Think Surgical does the T Solution Total 1 knee, and the Nuvasive Pulse, which is an imaging solution for the spine, where it's not a robot, but rather a image guided or an image. It's a imaging system that allows for the visualization of the instrumentation
Okay.
for a spine procedure.
So there's a lot more OEM names on that list. It seems like that's a big strategy for them in around their orthopedic products to also offer automation or robotics to help the surgeon.
Yeah, the orthopedic space has been exploding in this area more so than the soft tissue, and orthopedic, all the major players. So of all the companies I rattled off, I believe 6 or 7 of them are make up our orthopedic top 10 that we do every year, and that's a list we generate by company revenue. So
Okay.
it's purely factual. It's just what their orthopedic device revenue is, and like I said, 6 or 7 of the companies I named are in that list. So you can see it's a major push in the orthopedic space. And what it permits for surgeons is uh, it enhances their precision. Obviously,
Okay.
you're talking about procedures that are going for 6, 7, 8 hours. Fatigue sets in. So they're they want to they need to make sure that their cuts are precise, that their placement is precise, that in the case of a knee implant, that the knee implant is balanced. So there's all these factors that's a long time to be working on one patient. So the robots help with precision, and then also as a result help to eliminate some of that fatigue.
Okay. So that made sense. One of the puzzles I was trying to figure out was with all the long entry time to entry into the market, the millions of dollars that have to go in these solutions, what was the burning business case that that they were trying to solve? And so what you were explaining there is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it's really around helping the surgeon through these long, extensive operations do a better job, a more accurate job, and hence not only are you saving the workload and the fatigue from them, but the patient outcomes, I'm assuming, would be the goal is to have them greatly improved. So faster recovery times, like you said, lower rate of infection, less trauma.
Right. Yeah, and these are all the goals. Whether or
Yeah,
not they're all being achieved or not is a
yeah,
difference. I mean, you do get some studies that come back where you hear about this robot system is not significantly great. The outcomes are not significantly greater than more traditional surgery, and in other cases, they find that there is an improvement. Ultimately, as these get better, I think they can only get better, and I think ultimately you'll see procedures be or benefit from the robot system.
okay. So it started in soft tissue. then quickly the orthopedic guys got on the bandwagon. It sounds like the orthopedic, there's more solutions available on the orthopedic side of the fence in
Yeah,
terms of.
definitely. Yeah, what's on the market? Absolutely. What's available on the market? Certainly much more crowded field in the orthopedic space. And as you kind of indicated, or you hinted at, a lot of these robots are approved by, by the FDA for use with these companies' products. So,
Okay.
the Navio from Smith and Nephew works with Smith and Nephew's knee product. So it's not like you're using one robot from one company with the product of another company. This is about the company providing more of a complete solution to a hospital than it is about just selling a robot.
Yeah, I guess that ties into what Tony Freeman was saying in the webinar series, where they were the big OEMs were looking to kind of own the department, right? So if you're Smith and Nephew, you want to go to a hospital, and the orthopedic department, you want to provide end-to-end solutions for that department. So if they have one of your robot systems, it's approved for your implants, it only made sense they're going to use your implants as well too. They have no other choice at that point.
Right, exactly. And when you look out, when you start looking at other uh, equipment within the OR. You may have patient monitoring systems that are also provided by the company, or tracking system, a instrument tracking system that's available from the company. So yeah, so they're trying to, as you said, own, or as Tony said, own the the segment or the OR, or own the room where more of their products are being incorporated into a full solution rather than just one-off pieces.
Now, and I don't know if you spend a lot of time looking at the other areas of the world, or if you cover the U.S. mostly, but so up in Canada here, we're more socialist, I guess, in this from our healthcare, where um, the majority of costs are covered by our government, which is us paying taxes, right? Where in the States, it's more transaction based, and the healthcare is privatized. Is the business case different between the transaction based and the like a robotics taking hold more in a US private model versus a public model, or
Well,
is the business case pretty even across the two?
yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely more prominent in the U.S., but
Hmm.
I mean, robotics is, as I said earlier, the Da Vinci was approved in Europe before it was
Yeah,
approved in the
and
U.S. So, it's definitely being used elsewhere, and we do get announcements that such and such robotic system is now approved in Europe or China or India or wherever it is, or Canada,
right.
wherever it is being used. Orthopedic in general is a greater market, has its biggest market by far in the U.S. still. The U.S. market for orthopedics is the largest in the world, so that by itself kind of makes the robotics being used largest in U.S. But these robotic systems are definitely being used elsewhere as well. They're being implemented and put into play elsewhere. Um,
Now with the pandemic, um, on the news we see a lot of uh, uh, it's raised a lot of different applications for robots. So pandemic, we talk about cleaning and sterilization, and we see some mobile robots. In here in Canada, we have some in trial mode. I don't know that they've been deployed at scale. Um, is there other areas that you see robots playing a large role in the medical system?
well, yeah, I mean, there's UV sterilization robots, and like you said, especially with the pandemic, that'll go into a room and it'll uh, eliminate certain percent. I don't know what the percentages are, but it
Yeah.
goes in. It's used for cleaning purposes, where it'll be used in a room, and the ultraviolet kills, bacteria, germ, whatever might be growing or may have been left from a previous patient in that room. And they're still doing wipe down and things like that, but that's certainly a helpful measure. I mean, it can only help the situation and try and prevent, because hospitals are also, I mean, forget about the pandemic for a minute. Hospitals are very concerned with healthcare acquired infections,
Hmm.
HAIs, and this is something, especially in the U.S., where you mentioned the U.S. is primarily a transactional based healthcare system. That actually is changing to a value based healthcare system. So what that means is that so payers, whether it be Medicare or a private insurance company, are providing a fixed price for, let's just say, a total knee replacement. So they say, okay, there's pre-op, there's the actual procedure, there's post-op, there's recovery, there's physical therapy. All these things bundled in are valued at X dollars. So we're going to pay you X dollars to provide a patient a total knee replacement. So if hospital A can do it for a certain price, and their systems are in place where they've eliminated waste from their costs. They've eliminated time. They're able to get more patients in. They're able to get patients out of the hospital or out of recovery faster. I mean, for a total knee replacement, we're seeing a lot now in outpatient centers where it's being done the same day. Um, so if the payer is providing a certain fixed price for that, the hospital is responsible for the full treatment. If they can do it more economically than another location, then they're going to keep more of that money as profit.
Okay.
If they can't, or if there's an infection, that's not an additional coverage. You can't say, oh well, they got an infection, so now we have these things we have to do. That's all part of your bundled payment.
Okay.
Um, so, you know, it's it's on the hospitals to be more efficient and more effective in their delivery of treatment. And as this rolls out more, I think you're going to see um, it's definitely going to trim the fat on healthcare systems that are not up to snuff or up to par,
Yeah.
as opposed to others.
Yeah. That makes sense. We saw a similar kind of trend sweep through the aerospace industry. There was a couple of the OEMs, especially when you talk about the engines, they called it pay by the hour. In that strategy, if that engine was on wing and ready to fly, that's when the airlines they would lease the engine, and that's when they would pay for that engine.
Right.
And this would get wrapped up in a 10 or 20-year service contract. So any solution you could bring to these engine OEMs that maximize the uptime of that engine, kept it on wing, and when it does come off wing, any solution you could bring that would minimize the turnaround time, so getting it back onto wing, that was important for them. So and they in that case they really looked to digitization, technology, automation to help with some of those strategies for improving turnaround times when it enters those shop visits. If you What you typically would do is tear down that engine, send out all the components to your supply chain, and then when they come back, you can reassemble, test, and put it back on. So if you're fixing those engines faster, um, you're making more money. So it sounds like a very similar strategy. And for the aerospace, it did trim a lot of fat and it did drive a lot of innovation.
Yeah, it's definitely going to increase efficiency, and we've already seen hospitals. Um, excuse me. We've already seen hospitals looking to their suppliers for devices and technologies that'll help them be more efficient with their patient care, and at the same time, you're seeing medical device manufacturers want more of that reimbursement dollar. So they're putting out more products that will uh, address an array of issues.
Okay. Okay. Now we talked a lot about, the kind of the end use robotics, the surgical environment, the sterilization. How about, when we start looking into the supply chain and some of the leaders of, the OEMs, the J&Js, the Smith& and Nephews, the Dupuis, when you start, when we start dealing with supply chain and manufacturing, is there is it on their roadmap? Is it on their in their conversations looking at more robotics solutions, automation? What type of strategies are they putting forward?
Well, the interesting thing that I'll be curious to see is with the pandemic, there's obviously been talk of reshoring of medical device supply and critical components and critical healthcare needs. But the U.S. can't support that kind of reshoring initiative at the level that some people are talking about. It's just not, we don't have the labor. Um, so one thing that would be proposed is more automation, and automation is certainly already being used.
Hmm.
Robots on the assembly line, and what's emerging is, I'm sure about cobots. Um, where they're working side by side with human operators. Um, so you're seeing talk of that, um, and I think that's going to happen. I think there's going to be an increase in automation and the use of robotics, but that's only going to go so far. I mean, you're still going to see, uh, outsourcing to other countries.
Hmm.
It's still going to happen. Now, whether or not other countries use it as much, I guess that'll depend on the particular region. But certainly in the U.S., I think it'll be a trend. I just don't know to what degree.
Yeah, yeah, and again, going back to the Tony Freeman and what he was saying, when they look at the growth and where it's to come, um, he was saying that the wealth of the middle class and the growing middle class, it's in Asia right now. And so in terms of growth of potential clients for the new medical devices that are coming out, a lot of that is in Asia. As you get that large group of wealthier individuals as they age, he was saying that that's where the growth is. So, that's also, I guess, a competing trend to onshoring versus where is your customer base and where is the growth coming from. Um, from my understanding of the market so far, there is a big synergy being close to the customer. So right now, when I look at the surgery, the consumers of the medical implants, U.S. is number one, Europe is big, and so that's where a lot of the manufacturing is right now. So it'd be interesting to see how those two competing trends, and I think Tony's stats were talking out to 2050. So we've got a few years to wait before it becomes a real issue. Hopefully, we'll both be retired by that point.
Exactly, exactly. But we are seeing both suppliers and OEMs opening up locations, not always for the low labor advantages in certain regions of the world, but to be closer to their patient or to their customer, like you kind of indicated. You see, they're opening up factories in China not to then export it back to the U.S. or export it to Europe, but to serve China or to serve Japan or serve the Asian market. They're opening up facilities in Europe not to export it over to Asia. They're doing it to serve Europe. So there's and I think again with the pandemic, we saw what happens when your suppliers are in one location and then your factories or your manufacturing center is in another. There's definitely a disconnect and there's definitely a concern. Well, it doesn't have to be a global pandemic. It could be a natural disaster. We saw the nuclear problem in Japan where, that certainly caused a problem where, getting parts from that region or getting components from that region, it wasn't happening for quite some time. Or if you have, the hurricane that ran through Puerto Rico, you know, so there are, it doesn't have to necessarily just be, oh, well, when's the next global pandemic going to be?
Yeah.
There's natural disaster. I mean, look what happened down in Texas with the they got snow. You're from Canada, or you're up in Canada. I'm in New Jersey. Snow doesn't shut anything down, but for Texas, this was a major catastrophe. And that's in the U.S. We're not talking about Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico being part of the U.S., but you know what I mean. We're
Yep.
not talking about a region of the world where the infrastructure isn't quite the same.
Yep.
South America or Central America or Mexico. So natural disasters can happen just about anywhere. You need to have it's I don't know if need is the right word, but it's definitely an advantage to have your supply chain close by regionally, um, not only to avoid potential problems that can be tied to natural disasters, but also uh, for the fact that your costs are going to be less if you're supplying your supply chain and your manufacturing facility are serving all that same region.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that one of the takeaways that I have from going through this and just like you said, watching all the natural disasters, some of these global companies, um, the term decentralized manufacturing, that can be an important thing. So you're not putting all your eggs in one super facility where all your manufacturing happens and then logistics flows out from there where you're delivering around the world. Having smaller manufacturing facilities spread out around the world. So if one area goes in lockdown because of an outbreak, and you can't get your workers into the factory, or in another area, you've got a tornado hits, then you're mitigating your risk by being in more regions,
Right.
and spreading around that manufacturing. And I really believe that that's where technology, that's one of the enabling things that we're seeing from technology. On our podcast, we had somebody from Brian Germain from Optomech, who's they're 3D printing company,
Mm-hmm.
and we looked at some of the roadmaps from 3D printing, and one of the key things that one of the promises that 3D printing was decentralized manufacturing, where from the cloud you can ask a number of different companies, okay, can you manufacture this part for me? And the 3D printing, you just take a 3D CAD file and it's able to uh, print that file. Very flexible manufacturing. Of course, it's a little more complicated than that, and there's more to take care of. But cobots is another trend. Being able to um, and there's a couple of promises there. One is being able to work side by side, but as it's evolved, the simplicity of these cobots. So being able to set it up in one area of your factory, teach it to do a job, and then when that job runs out, you take that robot, move it to a different place, and quickly teach it to do something else.
Right.
And the simplicity of adopting that technology. So I think, from a technology standpoint, we're also trending to being able to enable those type of flexible manufacturing spaces.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. There is a little bit more involved with the medical device industry
Mm.
because you do have to validate those manufacturing processes. So
Yeah.
that is an extra step. But I do believe that again, especially coming out of the pandemic, supply chain redundancy is going to be a primary issue. OEMs are going to uh, start looking at that more closely of their supply chain. Hey, if I know you have this factory where you're making our part, what happens if something happens? How do you can you ensure more parts? Or they may even start to second look at more secondary source providers. They may employ two or three companies in
Mm.
their supply chain, and it is funny because you know before the pandemic, the entire talk in the medical device space was how OEMs were trimming their supply chain, how they
Okay.
were eliminating supply chain partners, and they were really, shrinking the number. They wanted to go from 600 supply chain companies to 400 supply chain companies, and they wanted to reduce the number. And now, coming out of the pandemic, that seems like it may not be the best strategy.
Yeah,
So
time to
you
rethink
may,
that.
yeah. So I mean, and some companies will say, hey, you know what, we're confident in our supplier because yeah, we're only working with this one company, but they have 17 locations. So unless there is a global event, um, if there's a natural disaster in one location or there's a labor problem in one location, they've got other ones that can pick up the slack, and the process is validated at all their locations, whatever the case is. But there'll definitely be redundancy will be a big item for OEMs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good point not to be underestimated in terms of what you've mentioned. It can be quite challenging. Uh, we saw it in aerospace too, but just the regulatory approval to uh, prop up additional manufacturing facilities and all the hurdles. Once you have something approved, aerospace had very similar challenges. And fortunate for us, the robotization of some of the processes, it did build in some flexibility. So you were able to tool proof a program, approve a program, and then that could be run at within the same type of machine, but it would be in different location. And that allowed some of that flexibility, but it's not easy to do, and that's not to be underestimated. That was certainly a challenge that we saw in aerospace as well too, with a similar quality system.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Aerospace is the one that always gets compared
Yeah.
to medical devices. It's still an area I really don't know a lot about the specifics for. Um, but then again, the medical device industry is enough for me to keep track
Yeah,
of.
for sure. You just have to change instead of FDA, it's FAA. So it's just
There
one
you
letter
go.
difference. It's
Yeah.
not so complicated. Yeah.
Right.
Well, Sean, it's been fascinating chatting with you. I really appreciate you giving us kind of the lowdown and the overview of all the what's happening in the robotics industry for the medical. Was there any other elements you wanted to touch upon before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I think we hit on quite a bit. You know, um, the robot, like we were talking about earlier with the robotic surgical systems. I don't see it slowing down. I think we're only going to see more players emerge or more solutions. I will quickly mention one that I recently heard about. Company by the name of Galen Robotics.
Hmm.
And what they're doing is they're offering a robotic, or will be offering. I apologize, I don't remember exactly if they were on the market or if I believe they're coming to market. But what they are doing is, we were talking very quickly about the investment that's required of these robotic surgical systems. That is, it's an expensive package, and there's a lot involved. What they're doing is they're providing a robotic surgical system subscription where they will provide the capital equipment, and the healthcare facility or hospital has to commit to a certain number of use cases,
Okay.
and they buy their supplies from the company, but there is no upfront capital equipment investment. So it is sort of like a leasing arrangement or a subscription arrangement. And that was the first time I had heard about that. And I'll be curious to I'll definitely be curious to see how that plays out, because it may be a solution for even some of the larger players to look at and explore, especially companies that offer a lot, those full surgical suites. So, hey, if you buy all the components, you commit to a certain number of procedures, you buy the equipment from us, we'll let you use the robot itself, with no investment directly.
Great.
But I don't know if that's in their plan or not, but it was definitely an interesting model.
Yeah, yeah, that is interesting. I was talking with a startup robot company. You mentioned cobots, and they were coming to market. They're out of New York, and the name eludes me right now. They're coming to market, and their robot is to be offered as a service. So you can't buy it, and for, I don't know, let's say $700 a month, you have the robot for use. If ever it breaks down during the term, they send you a new one to replace. And for the life that you use the robot, it's more of a robot as a service type option.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting model. We'll have to see if it actually works.
Yeah, definitely. One last question. So last time I was on the MPO website, there was still some events for this year in person. Are those going to happen? What's your prediction? Are we getting together in person this year?
Normally I claim to be a realist, but I think in this case I'm a optimist. Um, I think later in the year we will definitely see events. To what extent they will be or what they'll look like, I have no idea. But
Yeah. Will anyone show
I
up?
am hopeful that we will be back to events probably after the summer.
Okay, I hope so, because I'm ready to roam free again and go
Exactly.
visit everybody and rekindle some relationships. So, well, Sean, it's been fantastic chatting with you, and we'll put a link to your article and to the recording to your webinar with Tony Freeman in the show notes. And with that, I wish you a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great. So this concludes the episode of Robotics for All podcast by AV&R. If you don't want to miss another single episode, don't forget to subscribe to our show in your favorite podcast app. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll talk again soon.